The time is at hand.
The elusive dog-like creature attacks livestock, bleeding them dry of blood.
8 to 10 feet tall, shadowy aliens.
But I am telling you right now,
we need a great reset.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
Welcome to In Dark Places. 4 out of 5 dentists agree. I'm your Huckleberry, Junebug Fugit. Have you heard that there's some kind of weird plot by the elites unfolding surrounding the upcoming solar eclipse here in America? There's rumors flying around the internet now that the elites are planning on unleashing some kind of new disease on us, or going to drop a nuclear bomb, or something weird is supposed to happen during the solar eclipse on April 8th. As far as I can tell, this bunch of rumors have started because of the fact that there's supposedly going to be beefed up security and police forces and stuff like that in these towns that will be witnessing the eclipse. And just because there's going to be like a bunch of like National Guard and stuff out helping the traffic flow, people are just going crazy. And my thought is that's probably not really nothing nefarious. I went down to Tennessee back in 2017 for the last solar eclipse we had, and the interstate was a nightmare. Traffic was going like 30 miles an hour because it turns out that other people had the same thing in mind. They wanted to go to Tennessee as well and go see the eclipse. So yeah, I guess it's just they just want to help out with the traffic flow and stuff so that junk doesn't happen again. I don't think they're going to be dropping a nuke on us. Not yet anyway. But just in case, I'm sounding the alarm. How you like that? It used to not be a thing when I was a kid. People could care less about solar eclipses and stuff. But now with the internet, I guess things like that kind of set people off, and everyone becomes a groupie and they start following the show to different towns and stuff. I don't know. It's a weird time we live in.
Breaking news. This just came in the In Dark Places news desk. Man finds use for a piece of wood he had in the garage that was there since 1982 because it might come in handy one day. Thank you.
Hey, Jimmy Haunted. Thank you, sir. Keeping us informed there. What are your thoughts on reincarnation? Have you heard of that? The belief in reincarnation, that a man's soul is reborn over and over again in another body or form, stretches far back into the past. The doctrine appears in primitive religions such as those as Indian tribes of Assam, Nagas, and Lachase, who believed that after death the soul took the form of an insect. The Bakongs of Borneo believed that their dead were reincarnated into the bearcats that frequented their raised coffins. The Kikuyu women in Kenya often worshipped a place inhabited by their ancestral souls in the belief that to become pregnant they must be entered by an ancestral soul. According to Buddhist and Hindu thought, man or the soul is reborn in accordance with merits acquired during his previous lifetime. But some sects of Hinduism hold that a man does not necessarily assume a human form in the next life. If he has been involved with a vice or a crime, it is possible that he may return as a cactus toad, lizard, or even poison ivy. The Buddhists believe that a man is made up of elements: body, sensation, perception, impulse, emotion, and consciousness, which fall apart at death. The individual, as such, ceases to exist, and a new individual life begins according to the quality of the previous life, until at last achieving perfection and nirvana, eternal bliss. Although reincarnation is not mentioned in Western texts until the late Greek and Latin writers, the idea dates back to at least the 6th century BC. It appears in the Orphic writings, which appear to have played a great part in the thought of Pythagoras. He believed that the soul had fallen into a bodily existence and would have to reincarnate itself through other forms to be set free. He himself claimed to have had previous existences, including one as a soldier in a Trojan War. Plato was greatly influenced by the Orphico-Pythagorean views and mentions reincarnation in his concluding part of the Republic. The soul, according to Plato, is immortal, the number of souls fixed, and reincarnation regularly occurs. Although discarded by Aristotle and other Stoic views, Plato's derivation was taken up by later schools of thought such as the Napoleonists. Within the Christian Church, the belief was held by certain Gnostic sects during the 1st century AD and by the Manichaeans in the 4th and 5th centuries. But the idea was argued by eminent theologians at the time, and in 553 AD, the Emperor Justinian condemned reincarnation at the Second Council of Constantinople as heresy. Today, the Westerner does have some difficulty in identifying with the Eastern ideal of reincarnation. Most Westerners, religious denominations, share the view that the individual retains individuality after death, and finds the idea of returning as an animal or plant distinctly foreign. In 1917, the Roman Catholic Church denounced the idea as heresy. Most adherents of reincarnation are now claiming the evidence from regressive hypnosis as proof for their case. So this week on the show, reincarnation. We loved sightings and unsolved mysteries and those types of shows back in the day, and I've talked about that. And it always made us wonder about reincarnation. Some of it seems pretty convincing. I want to believe. When Brandon was a baby and just learning how to talk and everything, we would ask him weird questions about where he works and stuff like that, just to try to get some kind of little nugget of reincarnation to prove it for ourselves or whatever. And Brandon just always looked at us like, what are you talking about? So we couldn't find any kind of proof for reincarnation in our studies. Neuroses and phobias may be caused by traumas experienced in alleged former lives that are revealed under hypnosis. Thus, one woman's terrible fear of water was caused by her having been bound with chains as a gallery slave in a previous existence, thrown into a river and eaten alive by crocodiles. A man, terrified of descending in lifts, had been a Chinese general who had accidentally fallen to his death from a great height. A young American girl, about to dive from a diving board, was suddenly paralyzed with fear after a moving bystander had been reflected in the water. Hypnosis revealed the hideous end of a former life in which she had been a schoolgirl in Florida who was jumping into the water, had seen the shadow of the alligator that was to devour her moving below the surface. Anne Doling, an ordinary housewife who, during over 60 hours of regression, became Sarah Williams, an orphan living a life of utter squalor in a Liverpool slum in the first half of the 19th century. When asked what was happening in Liverpool in 1850, Anne Doling mentioned the visit of a foreign singer whose name had been Samat Tadui, a bird. Research showed that Jenny Lind, a Swedish nightingale, on her way from Sweden to America, sang for 2 nights in Liverpool's Philharmonic Hall in August of 1850. Whether or not these are memories of genuine previous experiences, they are convincing to many who have them. Much of the investigation into this particular aspect of hypnosis challenges the skeptics to find an explanation other than that of reincarnation. There are countless examples of hypnotic regression. Perhaps the most famous of all was the case of Bertie Murphy. In a number of sessions from November 1952 to October 1953, Maury Bernstein, an amateur American hypnotist, regressed Mrs. Virginia Tighe to a life in early 19th century Ireland. Mrs. Tighe, 29 years old at the time, a native of Madison, Wisconsin, and resident in Chicago from the age of 3 until her marriage, had never visited Ireland, nor had much to do with Irish people. Under hypnosis, she began to speak with an Irish accent. She was Bridget Bertie Murphy, daughter of Duncan and Kathleen Murphy, Protestants living at the Meadows, Cork. Her brother Duncan was born in 1796, married Amy, daughter of Mrs. Strain, who was mistress of a day school attended by Bertie when she was 15. At about 1818, she married a Catholic, Brian McCarthy, whose relatives she named, and they traveled by carriage to Belfast through places she named, but whose existence has never been found on any map. The couple worshipped at Father John Gorman's St. Teresa's Church. They stopped at stores that Bertie named, using coins correctly described for the period. In addition, Bertie produced a number of Irish words when asked, using some as they were used then, though their meanings had been changed since. Slip, for example, referring to a child's pinafore, not petticoat, the more common modern word. Bertie Murphy had read some Irish mythology. She knew some Irish songs and was a good dancer of Irish jigs. At the end of one sitting, Mrs. Tighe, aroused from her trance, yet not fully conscious, danced the morning jig, ending her performance with a stylized yawn. Her description of another dance was confirmed in detail by a lady whose parents had danced it, another telling detail that she described the correct procedure for kissing the Blarney Stone used in Bertie's day. Bertie's story was investigated by American magazine Empire. William Barker was commissioned by the magazine to spend 3 weeks in Ireland checking the facts Bertie had given. His visit resulted in a 19,000-word report. That's a lot of words. Barker's account is typical of regression cases. Some facts were confirmed and others unconfirmed. Others proved incorrect. Memories of insignificant detail proved true, while Bertie displayed total ignorance of other important events. Confirmation of facts proved impossible in many instances. There was no possibility, for example, of confirming dates of birth, marriages, and death, as no records were kept in Cork until 1864. And if the Murphy family kept records in a family Bible, a customary procedure, its whereabouts are not known. No information could be discovered concerning St. Teresa's Church or Father Gorman in Belfast. But the two shops mentioned by Bertie, Kerrigan, and Farr had both existed. Bertie had said that Uilleann pipes had been played at her funeral, and these were found to have been customarily used at funerals because of their soft tone. So the neutral inquirer is left puzzled. Where did Mrs. Tighe learn about Uilleann pipes kissing the Blarney Stone and the names of shops in Belfast whose existence was only confirmed after painstaking research? For nearly 50 years, a team at the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia has been collecting stories of people who can recall their past lives. And if the professors determine that there is some merit to these memories, their findings will call into question the idea that our humanity ends with our death. Among the case studies is the story of an Oklahoma boy named Ryan. A few years ago, the 4-year-old woke up screaming at 2 in the morning. Over the preceding months, he'd been pleading with his bewildered mother, Cindy, to take him to the house where he'd lived before. In tears, he'd beg her to return him to his glittering life in Hollywood, complete with a big house, a pool, and fast cars. "That was so fabulous," he once said. "I can't live in these conditions. My last home was much better." When Cindy went into her son's room that night, Ryan kept repeating the same words, "Mommy, I'm homesick," as she tried to comfort him and rock him to sleep. "He was like a little old man who couldn't remember all the details of his life. He was so frustrated and sad," said Cindy. The next morning, she went to the library, borrowed a pile of books about old Hollywood, and brought them home. With Ryan in her lap, Cindy went through the volumes. She was hoping the pictures might soothe him. Instead, he became more and more excited as they looked at one particular book. When they came to a still of a scene in a 1932 movie called Night After Night, he stopped her. "Mama, that guy's me. The old me," he said, when he pointed to one of the actors. "I was shocked," said Cindy. "I never thought that we'd find a person who he thought he was." But she was equally relieved. Ryan had talked about his other life and been so unhappy, and now we had something to go on. Although neither Cindy nor her husband believed in reincarnation, she went back to the library the next day and checked out a book about children who possessed memories of their past lives. At the end of it was a note from the author, Professor Jim Tucker, M.D., saying that he wanted to hear from the parents of kids with similar stories. So Cindy sat down and wrote him a letter. An archivist pored over books in a film library until she found a person who appeared to be the man in the film that Ryan had singled out. He was Hollywood agent Marty Martin, who had made an unbilled cameo in Night After Night. After Cindy spoke with Dr. Tucker, he interviewed Ryan, and then the family contacted Martin's daughter. She met with Dr. Tucker, Ryan, and Cindy, and along with public records, she confirmed more than 50 details that Ryan had reported about her father's life, from his work history to the location and contents of his home. Cindy felt tremendous relief when she was told that her son's story matched Martin's. She said, "He wasn't crazy. There really was another family." Born in Seattle, 1991, Sonam Wangdu was only 2 years old when he realized he was actually the fourth reincarnation of the original Tibetan Lama. A Lama is the Tibetan word for guru. Daesung Rinpoche I. The realization was the culmination of a number of signs that had been accumulating since before the boy was even born. These included the visions of his mother and her own Lama, as well as the words of the third reincarnation of Daesung himself, Daesung Rinpoche III, who informed his acolytes in 1987, the year of his death, "I will be reborn in Seattle." In 1996, the boy, who by then only answered to the name Trukala, which means reincarnation, left his family forever to be raised by monks while studying Tibetan Buddhism in Kathmandu, Nepal, and eventually becoming the head of a monastery there. Arriving in Nepal dressed in gold and maroon robes and riding on a luggage cart, pushed by his mother, the little Lama smiled widely, reported Seattle Met in a 2016 follow-up story tracing the boy's journey over the past 20 years. When asked how long he would stay in Nepal, though, the little boy was serene, almost stoic. Lots of time, he said. I'm just going to stay here a long time. And it doesn't say who said that. I guess it was his mom. That has proven to be true. The boy is now in his 25th year of life as the fourth reincarnation of Desung Rinpoche I. I have questions. Now let's see. The boy's mom was already thinking this along the lines anyway, and no one is questioning that. Maybe it's all her idea, huh? It was TV producers who taught Dr. Tucker about the best-known recent reincarnation case study. In 2002, he was contacted to work for and appear on a show about reincarnation, which never aired, and was told about James Leininger, a 4-year-old Louisiana boy who believed that he was once a World War II pilot who had been shot down over Iwo Jima. Bruce and Andrea Leininger first realized that James had these memories when he was 2 and woke up from a nightmare yelling, "Airplane crash! Plane on fire! Little man can't get out!" And he also knew about the details of a World War II aircraft that it would seem impossible for a toddler to know. For instance, when Andrea referred to an object on the bottom of a toy of a plane as a bomb, James corrected her by saying it was a drop tank. Another time, he and his parents were watching a History Channel documentary, and the narrator called a Japanese plane a Zero. James insisted that it was a Tony. In both cases, he was right. The boy said that he had also been named James in his previous life, and that he'd flown off a ship named the Nadotama. The Leiningers discovered a World War II aircraft carrier called the USS Nadotama Bay. In its squadron was a pilot named James Houston, who had been killed in action over the Pacific. James talked incessantly about his plane crashing, and he was disturbed by nightmares a few times a week. His desperate mother contacted past life therapist Carol Bowman for help. Bowman told Andrea not to dismiss what James was saying and to assure him that whatever happened had occurred in another life and body, and he was safe now. Andrea followed her advice, and James's dreams diminished. His parents co-authored Soul Survivor, a 2009 book about the family's story. Professor French, who is familiar with Dr. Tucker's work, says the main problem with his investigating is that the research typically begins long after the child has been accepted as a genuine reincarnation by his family and friends. About James Leininger, French says, although his parents insisted they never watched World War II documentaries or talked about military history, we do know that 18 months of age, James was taken to a flight museum, where he was fascinated by the World War II planes. In all probability, the additional details were unintentionally implanted by his parents, and by a counselor who was a firm believer in reincarnation. Dr. Tucker says that he has additional documentation for many of James's statements, and that they were made before anyone in the family had heard of James Houston or the USS Nadotama Bay. French responds that children's utterances are often ambiguous and open to interpretation. For example, perhaps James said something that just sounded like Notama. Bruce, James's father, understands French's belief. I was the original skeptic, he says, but the information James gives us is so striking and unusual. If someone wants to look at the facts and challenge them, they're welcome to examine everything we have. Bruce laughs at the idea that he and his wife planted the memories, saying, "You try telling a 2-year-old what to believe. You're not going to be able to give them a script." Vladimir Levitsky, who was born David Socom in England in the 1930s, had such an innate gift for playing the piano that he was able to teach himself to be a concert pianist. When asked about lessons, he remarked, "I have no time for them. I have a technique of my own." So gifted was Levinsky, and at such a young age, that he came to recognize himself as the reincarnation of Franz Liszt, the German composer and pianist. By age 21, he was performing for packed concert halls and known as the Paganini of the piano. Unfortunately, Levinsky's interest in Liszt at times came to border on obsession, such as when he was playing a concert on January 23rd, 1952, and stopped playing halfway through to talk about Liszt. The audience was disappointed, but Levinsky, for his part, felt the concert was a tremendous success, in part because he experienced it as only the reincarnation of the renowned composer and performer Liszt could. One of the most famous documented cases of reincarnation comes from the leader in the field, the late Dr. Ian Stevenson. The case centered around a 32-year-old woman, Atara Hadar, who began describing her previous life in a nearby village when she was a child. Her parents didn't pay too much attention to her snake phobia and fascination with the Bengali culture, which was quite different from their Marathi culture. However, when her past life personality, Sharanda, emerged speaking Bengali, a completely different language, they became concerned. As Sharada, she named 25 people she had known during that lifetime, her relationship with each one, and how she interacted with them. Sharada lived 150 years earlier and lived nearly 600 miles from Erdara's home. Sharada claimed she had been bitten by a king cobra on her right toe, but had no recollection of her death. When Dr. Stevenson and his team of researchers learned of the case, he was pleased to discover it hadn't been contaminated by self-research, as he'd found so often when investigating reincarnation stories. He wrote a book about Uttara and the 24 incidents of her past life that his team was able to verify. A 3-year-old boy, touted as a golfing prodigy, claims he is 13-time winner Bobby Jones. The little boy, called Hunter, received a kid's set of plastic golf clubs when he was 2 years old and was immediately hooked. While watching a video clip from the 1930s that aired on the Golf Channel, that sounds exciting, Hunter pointed to Bobby Jones and announced that was him when he was big. After that, he insisted his parents call him Bobby, since that was his real name. In an attempt to verify what Hunter was saying, his father showed Hunter 6 photos from 1930s golfers. Hunter pointed to a photo of Bobby Jones and said, "That's me." Curious Hunter's father showed the boy several houses that included one of Bobby Jones's childhood home. Hunter looked at all the pictures, and when he got to Bobby's childhood home, he said, "That was home." Hunter's golfing talent grew quickly, and he was accepted into a 5-year-old class. Hunter is living up to his reincarnated claims, having won 41 out of 51 junior tournaments. 21 of those were in a row. Strangely, people who don't know about the little boy's claim comment to his father that the child swings like Bobby Jones. The little boy proclaimed to his parents that the Augusta course is his favorite. It so happens that Bobby Jones founded the Augusta National Golf Club and helped to design it. Jones had tremendous influence on the game and was co-founder of the Masters Tournament. One reincarnation story left an impression on Dr. Frederick Lenz, who wrote in his book, Lifetimes True Accounts of Reincarnation, about the verified claim by a boy named Charlie, who at age 4 recalled his death at Pearl Harbor. Mary was shocked when her 4-year-old son Charlie said, "I died once and it hurts." It all began when Mary took her daughter and son to a cliff diving performance, and on the way back to their car, Charlie blurted out, "I died once." And Mary thought he said dived, and asked him when he had dived, and young Charlie quickly corrected her, "No, I died once and it hurts." Mary asked how he died, and he replied that his leg was badly hurt. Over time, Charlie's story was pieced together through these conversations. In his past life, he was born as an only child named James Kello from San Francisco. When he was in his 20s, Kello was a naval officer and served on board a warship. The ship was bombed and exploded. James and 3 other men made it into a lifeboat, and when they got to shore, James dragged the only surviving crew member onto the beach. James fell onto the beach and died. Mary decided to take Charlie to visit the decommissioned USS Alabama, having misheard the name of the ship. She didn't find James Kello on the ship's roster, and the guide told her that the Alabama was never hit, but the Arizona was. While there, Charlie scooted about the ship as though he was a seasoned sailor. Later, his mother began researching the USS Arizona, lost during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Eventually, she was able to check the Arizona roster and found an officer, James Kello, from San Francisco. Dr. Lenz verified these and other aspects of Charlie's story, including the recovery of Officer Kello's body and those of the men in the lifeboat after the Arizona was struck with a Japanese torpedo bomb. The bomb hit the ship's magazine and exploded on December 7, 1941, during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The ship is still lying at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, and USS Arizona Memorial just out onto the water just above the ship's hull. So far, these stories seem pretty normal, nothing too exciting, but what gets me is, like, most of the time, people that act like they've been reincarnated say that they were someone famous, like this one here. The reincarnation story of Dorothy Eady is a fascinating story that began when she died at the age of 3. She fell down a staircase and was pronounced dead by the family doctor. Imagine the doctor's shock when he received a call to come back to the house, not an hour after he had left the grieving parents, who were now telling him that their little girl was alive. This was the beginning of Dorothy's lifetime belief that she was a reincarnated Egyptian priestess who lived 3,300 years ago. The revived Dorothy no longer spoke with a British accent, but an Egyptian one. She began having vivid dreams of a temple with a lush garden. She constantly begged her parents to take her home. Instead, they took her to the British Museum, and when Dorothy saw the Egyptian statues, she ran over to them, kissed their feet, and hugged them, declaring to her parents that these were her people. When Dorothy found a picture of the Egyptian temple of Seti, she told her parents it was her home. Her obsession with Egypt led her to move there with her Egyptian husband, and to name her son Seti. She soon recovered her memory of being Bentrishit, harp of joy. She was a priestess and the mistress of the pharaoh Seti. She broke her vow of celibacy when she became his lover, but to make matters worse, when she became pregnant, she committed suicide to spare the pharaoh public humiliation. Eventually, Dorothy's past life obsession destroyed her marriage that ended in divorce. However, she remained in Abydos, working with the Egyptian Department of Antiquities. Her knowledge of ancient Egypt astounded the archaeologists. Few people had the privilege of seeing inside the Temple of Seti, but the department wanted to test Dorothy's claims. Archaeologists led her into the Dark Temple and asked her to describe it. She passed with flying colors, describing everything inside the temple, even though she couldn't see anything. Outside, she pointed where the garden had once been, and upon excavation, tree stumps were unearthed. Dorothy enjoyed a full life working with archaeologists at the Temple of Seti site. She was given the nickname Seti, the mother of Seti, in honor of her son. Her contribution to understanding ancient Egypt was highly valued. And then there's the case of Jane Winthrop, who, under hypnosis, became Mary Dunlap, a settler in the 18th century of Massachusetts, who lost her husband, Alan. Certainly, said James Winthrop, I've never consciously known such an overpowering grief as I relived each time I spoke of Alan's death, adding, that which comes from any of us must be first within us. Here, Jane Winthrop touches upon an important element in the belief in reincarnation. Just as in this life, much of what we are is the result of forgotten and unconscious schooling and instruction, so our present selves, reincarnationists believe, are similarly made up of experiences from previous lives, which have also been forgotten, as in this life of neurosis may have been caused by a childhood trauma and cured by its being uncovered under hypnosis and brought to the patient's conscious memory. So a trauma from a past life may be revealed and its discovery heal the present life neurosis it has caused. And then there's Barbara Larson, a university graduate, a teacher until her marriage, and mother of 3. She was hypnotized in middle age and became Sam Sneed, a cocky young gambler and card sharp. Sneed's whole career was portrayed from a 19-year-old gamester, swaggering across America, hopping trains, one jump ahead of the lawmen of the towns in which he played, through salesman and entrepreneur to solid citizen, selling advertising and writing editorials for the Sacramento Bee. Shot by Frank Jordan, whom he had accused of corruption, he was buried in Sacramento Cemetery. One observer wrote, "To watch the transformation of swaggering Sam Sneed into a charming, attractive Californian matron was an astonishing experience. For 2 hours I had been so caught up with the life of this personality kid that I felt I knew him better than most of my friends, because this seemed to be the inner man speaking." Those who have since heard the tape recordings capture the same intensity of feeling and roar with laughter at his broad sallies. Allow me to introduce you to Joanne MacGyver and her previous life as Susan Gagnor. Joanne, who lived at Orilla, some 80 miles north of Toronto, was regressed by her father during her teens and produced some half-dozen former lives, of which 5 were fragmentary compared with that of Susan Gagnor. Her story was that she was born about 1835 in St. Vincent Township, Ontario, some 90 miles from Sydenham Township, later Owen Sound, close to where the MacGyvers lived. Susan married Thomas Morrow, a tenant farmer, in July of 1849. The ceremony being conducted by an itinerant preacher called McEachern, and they settled at Massey Village. Thomas was killed in an accident in 1863, and Susan died a completely uneventful existence as farmer's wife and widow in 1903. Though 19th century records of births and deaths are incomplete, some confirmation of the Gainier story was found. Gainier's farm was shown on a contemporary map issued by the Ontario Department of Lands and Forests. Massey exists, though it does not appear on most maps, and a Vels Point, mentioned by Susan, also exists. The tombstone of her close friend, Mrs. Speedy, a postmistress who died in 1909, can still be seen in Annan, a village nearby. Arthur Eagles remembered the Gainier family and knew Susan Marrow, whom he used to drive as an old lady into Owen Sound, and recalled that his parents told him that Thomas and she were man and wife. The Toronto Department of Public Records confirmed the existence of people previously named by Joanne, Mrs. Speedy, Robert McGregor, the blacksmith in Massey, Joshua Milligan, storekeeper, and William Brown Miller. Susan's knowledge of details of contemporary life was correct. Sugar came in packages at 10 cents a box. Saddles cost from $7.50 to $12. Oranges were greatly prized, and a Democrat was a kind of wagon, peculiar to that time and place. Joanne claimed to recognize places known to Susan, including the churchyard, a barn, and her old home, and identified a well where none had been known to exist. At one point during the investigation, she felt herself to be Susan Gainier, as if she were moving in two worlds simultaneously, with confusion of memories of past and present lives. When regressed, her voice changed from its normal house kindness to a lighter musical treble, and her depth of emotion under hypnosis, especially her joy after marrying Tommy, her recreation of scenes delineating her relationships, and the vivid pictures she gave of the Canadian wilderness were beyond acting or any impression given by reading books. And then there's Jane Evans, who has been regressed to 6 previous lives. First, she was Livonia, living in 286 AD, wife of Titus, tutor to Constantine, later Roman emperor, son of Constantius, and Helena, living at Eboracum, York. Livonia and Titus were converted to Christianity by a woodcarver named Albanus and died violently in Diocletian's reign. Professor Brian Hartley, an expert of Roman Britain, stated that Livonia knew some quite remarkable historical facts, and numerous published works would have been consulted if anyone tried to prepare the outline of such a story. Where the facts could have been checked, most of them proved correct. It is possible that Constantius could have been governor of Britain from 283 to 290 AD, because historians know nothing of these missing years of his life. Hartley, however, questioned some details, such as Livonia's statement that Roman ladies rode on horseback. Mrs. Evans' second life as Rebecca, a Jewess, showed an entirely different personality. She was massacred in 1190 with many other Jews in the crypt of St. Mary's Church, Castlegate, York, where no crypt was known until it was discovered in 1975, several years after the regression. Professor Barry Dobson, author of a book on the massacre, commented that Jane's story was true to what was known of the events and the times, that much of the detail was impressively accurate, and that disputed facts could well be true, and some could have been known only to professional historians. There are some anachronisms where memories of the present life and the previous life may have become confused, but Rebecca's terror when the murderers enter the crypt is, as usual, beyond acting. Her third life as Alison, the teenage servant of a French merchant prince, Jacques Coeur, has been criticized on the grounds that all the facts about Coeur are readily available to British readers. Mrs. Evans' knowledge included a description of the merchant's mansion at Bourges in the Loire Valley, with its courtyard and style of architecture in the year 1450. She also showed a detailed knowledge of medieval French history and a life of her master, though she omitted obvious facts such as he was married and had 5 children. Yet if Jane Evans's knowledge had been gained only from books, she would have known these facts, and if she had been faking, would have produced them. She referred to the King Charles VII by his nickname, Heron Legs. His thin shanks looked ridiculous in yellow tights. Gossiped about his mistress, Agnes Sorel, and other personalities, and repeated the rumor that Louis the Dauphin had murdered his wife. Alison also mentioned a golden apple containing jewels listed as a grenade in a catalogue of items confiscated by the treasury from Coeur. Mrs. Evans' fourth remembered incarnation was as Anna, lady-in-waiting to Catherine and Aragon at the time. She was about to leave for England to marry Henry VII's son, Arthur. She again gave correct historical details, but revealed nothing remarkable, nor did she reveal much in her fifth life as Anne Tasker, a London sewing girl in Queen Anne's time at the turn of the 17th and 18th centuries. She made one reference, however, which illustrates a difficulty for researchers in the field. She referred to the death of William, the Queen's only child, an allusion which critics fasten upon an obvious inaccuracy. Yet it is true in the sense that Anne's son, upon whom all her hopes rested, was her only remaining child. Mrs. Evans' last incarnation before present life was as Sister Grace, born in the 19th century, Des Moines, Iowa, and a member of an enclosed order. The nun has not been identified because no registration of birth in Iowa was required until the 1920s, and although census existed, they were not accurate. All that is known is that Sister Grace showed a knowledge of contemporary events that Jane seemingly did not have. It is reasonable to expect that Mrs. Evans would have spoken the languages of her incarnations, and a considerable research has been carried out on paranormal speaking in foreign tongues. However, most subjects, when regressed to previous lives in other lands, do not adopt the language of the time or century. But there you have it. Reincarnation. We are woefully out of time. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless.